Okay, so we've broken these fats down, these triglycerides. We have absorbed them, and now we need to transport them. And unlike carbohydrates and what we'll see next as proteins, those two things, short chain fatty acids, those get right into the bloodstream, right within the enterocyte, the intestinal cell. When it comes to lipids, when we start to get bigger and bigger and bigger, we need something else. And that's where the lymphatic system comes in. It's very similar to the circulatory system, to blood vessels. It has a few nuanced differences, but they absorb, transport the fat soluble vitamins and our big old lipids here, okay, our long chain fatty acids. Long chain fatty acids, glycerol, cholesterol, proteins, phospholipids, all those things, remember, congeal together, come inside, untangle, and then reform again. It's kind of interesting how this all happens. When we reassemble it back inside the intestinal cell, we form what's called the chylomicron. And it is truly a lipoprotein, where it is lipid and protein. And this structure, again, is formed inside the enterocyte or the intestinal cell. Either way, just know them both. The book interchanges them. I interchange those words. And when we incorporate into this chylomicron, it first enters into the lacteal. Let me just go over here, okay? Here's the villi. There's the microvilli. Here's that big old chylomicron being formed inside the intestinal cell. And it absorbs into this green looking thing, and that's right there, okay? That is your lacteal, right here. It enters into the lymphatic system, and ultimately it travels, okay? It travels to the circulatory system, okay? And all this green network right here, it's representing your lymphatic system. Just a series of very fine, very delicate vessels, okay? They transport excess fluids, okay, within the body. The chylomicron itself, think of it like the Death Star. It's super huge. It's super big. All right. So it has to enter into this lacteal because it is too big to get into the capillary within the intestinal cell. Eventually, it does get into the circulatory system up around the heart, called the left subclavian vein, and that's what they're showing you right here. Okay. There's your left subclavian vein. Okay. And the heart sits right there. Comes back to the heart, and then the heart pumps it out throughout the entire body. Here's what that lipoprotein looks like. This is just a generic one. Okay? It obviously would change a little bit as we start to kind of go through the process here, but this is a typical lipoprotein structure. Okay? There's my phospholipid, remember, hydrophilic, hydrophobic, and I'm able to transport all these proteins and fats. Remember, it's a lipoprotein. There's my protein structures. Okay, they're just embedded within. Cholesterol and triglycerides. This can easily transport or travel, I guess I should say, throughout a water medium, which is what blood is. As it travels through the circulatory system, as it travels through the blood vessels, those blood vessels are cells. Simple squamous epithelium, right? As they enter into structures, organs, those cells are going to have on their surface receptors for this lipoprotein. When cells require nutrients to make energy, they'll have these in there. They'll have these receptors on the surface. This chylomicron sees that. goes and docks to that receptor. We have an enzyme that gets released called lipoprotein lipase. And its one job is to break down that triglyceride found within that lipoprotein, the chylomicron. That's the first thing. As soon as it cuts off a piece of that triglyceride, it can enter into the cell, and we can use it for energy. Use the fatty acids and the glycerol molecule. Okay? We'll break those two down and we'll use it. And we can make a vast amount of energy. Just like your stomach, cells get full. Once a cell gets full, okay, and we'll look at that when we kind of start looking at metabolism here, chapter 8. It no longer will want any more fat. And so now this fat starts to stay within your blood vessels. And that starts coating the inside, atherosclerosis. We'll talk about that here in a second. As you can see, after about 12 hours, really most of the chylomicrons have been broken down. It's a good chunk of time, to be honest. After anywhere 10 to 12 hours, those chylomicrons are broken down. Now, are these enzymes nice and neat? No. It's not a scalpel. So when it goes in and starts to cleave off stuff and remove triglycerides, there is shrapnel. Okay? There is bits and pieces kind of floating around. All the blood travels through all of the organs. The most important one being that liver. The liver does so many dang things, it's unreal. Process nutrients, detoxify the blood, recycle old defective red blood cells. It also picks up all these remnants, the shrapnel, from this enzymatic activity on this chylomicron. It removes those from the blood. When it does that, it doesn't just remove them and throw them away. The body recycles a lot of stuff. So when it gets these remnants, it sticks them back together. And that's when it makes the VLDL. So if chylomicron is the first, I'm just going to put cholymic, okay? If the chylomicron is the first lipoprotein formed, the VLDL would be the second lipoprotein formed. Okay? This is made in the liver, made in the liver, made in the liver, made in the intestinal cell. Okay? So the vast majority of all these lipoproteins, as you can see, are made in the liver. The VLDL is made from the remnants of the chylomicron. It's as it has been traveling through the system, getting plucked off, right? Getting those triglycerides plucked out. Gets broken down and we need to repackage it. And that's what the VLDL is. Okay? Just like the chylomicron carries a good amount of triglycerides as well. Enters back into the blood. And just like before, lipoprotein lipase acts on the VLDL, dock to it, dock to the cell, enzymatic activity, pluck off a triglyceride, utilize it for our cellular needs. Same thing. Shrapnel remnants are going to happen. Again, as those pieces travel through, as those remnants travel through the liver, they get reconstituted into LDL. At this point, this is your third. And from a bad fat standpoint, now we're at it. This entire time, what have we been plucking off? Triglycerides, right? Chylomicron, triglycerides, VLDL, triglycerides, LDL, triglycerides have been plucked off. What hasn't? Protein, sure, yep. Cholesterol, yeah. So if we look at this from a percentage standpoint, you can see chylomicrons carry a ton of triglycerides. VLDL carry a ton of triglycerides. As these have been plucked off, their percentage goes down a little bit, but everybody else goes up. And now you can see by the time we get to LDL, I have a much more higher amount of cholesterol. All of these receptors are looking for triglyceride. So does LDL have a lot to offer for these cells? No. If it was to dock with the cell and dump off, okay, it wouldn't take long to empty this thing. But remember, cells get full just like your stomach does, and you stop eating. Cells do basically the same damn thing. And so if there's no receptors for this lipoprotein, this low density lipoprotein to dock, what's it going to do? Is it going to go anywhere? No, it has nowhere to go. So where does it stay? In your blood. And that's why LDL is considered the bad fat, the bad cholesterol, because it is entirely, or almost 50% cholesterol. And this just coats your blood vessels. Gets sticky. Stuff sticks to it. And we'll see how that happens here in just a second in the next section. The fourth player in this process isn't in a line of succession, like the chylomicron, the VLDL, the LDL. It's its own dude. The high density lipoprotein is made in the liver, and it is majority protein. That's why it's high density. Okay? Fat doesn't have a lot of density to it. The liver makes this. This goes out into the blood to remove cholesterol and eliminate it. Okay. HDL is your good cholesterol. HDL goes and picks it up. All that cholesterol that's just hanging out within the blood, HDL goes and looks for it, picks it up, takes it back to the liver for removal. And we'll see that just basically here in a second. Okay. Chylomicrons, VLDL, have a very strong attraction to these receptors on the cells. They like to bind. LPL does its action. LDL doesn't have a strong attraction, a strong affinity for that receptor. And if it does dock, it pulls off, and we're even more robust in cholesterol. So LDL can stay in circulation for a much longer period of time. Okay. And that's going to set up what we're going to see happen with atherosclerosis. Okay. with that cholesterol buildup that can happen inside your blood vessels if you have a high fat diet. Much more susceptible to oxidation, breakdown, okay? Because they're sitting there in the blood. The body doesn't like that, okay? So it's going to create a whole bad mess, as we'll soon see. As you can kind of see, we recycle quite a bit of that bile that gets released by the gallbladder or the liver, depending on if you have it or not. This helps to prevent all that fat within the small intestine to congeal together. It's emulsifier, so it keeps it separated. And by the end of the small intestine, by around the jejunum, we reabsorb the vast majority of our bile. And so we refer to it as enterohepatic circulation. Entero means intestines. Intestines. And hepatic means liver. Okay. As we reabsorb this, we also reabsorb some cholesterol as well. So that's how HDL does its action. By bringing it back to the liver, takes that cholesterol and will help to incorporate it into the bile, which we then secrete and help to absorb, more fats later on. It can also be used it can also, that cholesterol, be used to synthesize your lipoproteins as well, your VLDLs and your LDLs. It can also break down through a complex process and get rid of it in the urine as well, but I'm not going to get into that. Plants have fiber. And that fiber can trap that cholesterol. Okay, can also, keep bile within the intestine as well. And that'll pass from the small to the large and then out through your bowel movements. That's why high fiber diets, or sufficient fiber diets, I guess I should say, help to lower your cholesterol because they trap it. It gets trapped in the fibers. Okay? It gets trapped in that mesh. And you just bowel move it out. Here's what gallstones look like right here. This is a gallbladder that's obviously been removed from an individual. It's the 4 F's, basically. Fat, 40, flatulent female. This is a woman who is overweight, generally in their over 40 years of age. That's what YOA stands for. They have a high fat diet and they don't have enough bile within their gallbladder because those gallstones are taking up space, so it's not able to store and concentrate the bile effectively. And they're just constantly, squirting it out because they have such a high fat diet. Well, the flatulence comes from the inability to, get any fats absorbed properly. And so that gets into the large intestine and then, hello, gas. Usually there's also some right subscapular pain associated with it as well. But can men get it? Yes. Can it happen in younger women? Hell yeah. When I was practicing more full time, I saw a ton of 20 and 30-year-olds, late 20, early 30-year-olds have their gallbladders removed. Crazy. And there it is. You can see it can be really small stones, really big stones, but they can get into the ducts and block the ducts. Pretty painful. Right? Pretty painful. It can result in what's called steatorrhea. And steatorrhea is it's diarrhea. Your fecal matter is basically loaded up with fat. Okay. You can see white streaks if your fecal matter is like completely white. Go to the doctor. Go to the doctor. Because that means you got a fat absorption issue going down in your life. The book gets into some lipid storage diseases. It talks about Gaucher's disease. I'm not really, you don't need to know it. But you do need to know kind of some signs and what is happening. Okay, I'm not going to ask you to describe Gaucher's disease. There's many of them, to be honest. This is a link to the National Institutes of Health right here. If you click on that link, it's the National Institutes of Health, and it goes over a vast number of lipid storage diseases if you're curious. But again, kind of, they don't have enough enzymes, okay, enough enzymes to break them down, or the enzymes don't work properly. All right. Really, some of the signs and symptoms: swollen abdomen, an enlarged spleen or liver, swollen lymph nodes. So those are some of the major things that you would see with an individual. Okay, that swollen abdomen goes hand in hand with the swollen or enlarged spleen and liver. Tay-Sachs is another one as well, lipid storage issue. You can get lipids stored in your brain, which would be really bad. Lungs, bone marrow. So there's a lot of nasty things that can happen with this.